Raghuram Rajan, and I do what I do.
I should have started saying, my name is Raghuram Rajan, and stop. But I said, my name is Raghuram Rajan, and then I realized I had lost the bond cue. I wanted to make it absolutely clear that we did give advice, and this was the nature of the advice we gave. Be ready on day one with all the transaction currency that you're replacing. Say, I don't believe in this, I don't think it is right, and I use the only technique I have, which is opting out. You know that GDP has probably suffered some because of that, and the informal economy has also suffered. So it's not clear how much you will essentially unearth at the end. Pushing too hard on a system which is not completely transparent itself can create opportunities for extortion, for harassment. Public sector banks have had one sort of distraction after the other, but they haven't had time to essentially fix the underlying problems in their balance sheet and their strategy. What does it mean to be a foreign return? We are getting into this desiness. What is competing desiness? Who is truly a desi? As a public figure, it is your moral responsibility to speak out and say, I think this is our strength. I would be happy to return if the country wanted my services.
Raghuram Rajan calls the government's bluff in an exclusive chat with ET Now. The former RBI governor says he was never a part of the government's decision to demonetize high-value currency notes in November last year. Rajan's statement is in clear contrast with what the parliament had been told. Raghuram Rajan says he disagreed with the government's move on note ban, says he would have quit as the RBI governor if the decision was imposed upon the central bank. Also says a regulator cannot afford to sabotage a government's policy. If he disagrees, he must quit. Demonetization cannot be termed a success in pure terms of pure economics, asserts Rajan. The Economist says the note ban can be counted as a success only if made the exchequer richer by at least 2 lakh crore rupees, which it hasn't done. While demonetization failed to unearth black money, the move slammed the brakes on the economy at a time when the world is growing. Merger of public sector banks is not such a great idea, says the former IMF chief economist. Rajan says the move will distract the attention of bank management, but backs the NPA crackdown, saying that the threat of insolvency will force promoters to pay up. Also proposes jail term for willful defaulters. I don't need a Desi badge from anyone, says Rajan, as he hits back at his critics who had raised questions over his nationalistic credentials. The former RBI governor, who hit headlines over his remarks over rising intolerance during his tenure at the central bank, says he couldn't have remained a mute spectator to the going-ons. He also says saying a no to the government can be a career-ending decision. Raghuram Rajan is back. The former RBI governor has kicked off the demonetization debate yet again, claiming that he had advised the government against the note ban and was never a party to the decision. In an exclusive chat with your channel right here, Rajan says the ill-conceived move was slammed the brakes on Indian economy at a time when the world is growing. Not just that, the man who predicted the 2008 global meltdown says it is too early to talk about a revival in growth even in the second quarter. In an hour-long conversation with us right here at ET Now, Rajan called the government's bluff one after the other. He said currency crackdown has no impact on black money. It comes as a huge cost compared with the positives. No big spike in tax collection either. The digital economy is back to the trend line. It's time for a reality check. Is demonetization, as Rajan says, a big cost that the Indian economy has to bear? Other than that, Rajan also asserted in his boldest statement ever that saying no to the government can be a career-ending decision. And did he pay a price for saying that no? This is the big debate right here on the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and let's take you straight to our expert panel that's joining us on the show this evening. Maithili Busturmat, Shamika Ravi of Brookings, T.T. Ramu and Professor I.M. Ahmedabad, Rakesh Sinha of the RSS, Sanjay Jha of the Congress, and M.R. Venkatesh, political analyst. Thanks each one of you for being with us. Maithili, I'm going to begin with you, and my question has to be about what Raghuram Rajan has said, and he has very categorically said that he's not breaching privacy, he's only clarifying air because his name and his views have been distorted before a parliamentary panel. What do you believe? Do you believe he's breached secrecy here? Has he not kept his end of the bargain?
Well, since this is only a the book, if you're talking about the book, is only a collection of his essays and his speeches that he made in the RBI, I think there's no breach over there. As far as his interviews to the press at the time of the book release are concerned, he has perhaps only clarified, and we really do not know what is the breach of secrecy, because what is it that he has said that is entirely new? I don't see anything that is very new, because he had spoken earlier also, and as far as his saying that he was not a party to the demonetization, since it happened almost 2 months after he left, he clearly couldn't have been a party to the decision. If there were discussions with the RBI before it actually happened, clearly he must have been privy to those discussions. We do not know whether he agreed or he disagreed, what his advice was. He says he wrote to the government, but that note has not been made public by the government, and from the government side we have nothing at all. So we have his word certainly that this is what he said, but as far as demonetization itself is concerned, basically the jury is still out in that, Supriya, because while the cost, I entirely agree with him, it did create a setback for the economy. The benefits are intangible and maybe far into the future. So it would be too early to judge or to slam demonetization. Clearly there has been an immediate cost, an immediate cost which is clearly tangible as well. But in the long term, whether the costs and are more than benefits, we don't know.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the cost benefit and of course the entire growth debate in just a bit from now. But Mr. Venkatesh, we'll bring this to you. Has Raghuram Rajan breached privacy, or has he simply cleared the air on this? And I'm not just talking about his book. In a conversation that he's had with us, he has asserted, I have only chosen to speak on demonetization because my views were being distorted before Parliament. And which is why my question, has he breached privacy, or has he simply just cleared the air, which any man has a right to?
I am not a great votary for privacy in some sensitive issues. If Raghuram Rajan has to bring out certain things in the national interest, he definitely can bring it in. But unfortunately, what I see in the whole tirade has been that it is more that he has been deprived his 2 years term in office rather than anything substantial.
Okay, you know, I'm going to take this to the politicians on the show before I take this to the economists as well. And Mr. Sinha, you know, Raghuram Rajan insists, and I have no reason to believe that he's going to be lying about this. He says he advised and cautioned and red flagged the government against demonetization. The government still went ahead and did this 2 months after he actually quit office. My question really is, where did the advice come from? I mean, why did the government go in for such misadventure? Because, you know, the numbers are not now out and, you know, it hasn't really served a purpose. Who advised the government to go ahead and do this?
Raghuram Rajan fails to understand the core concept of democracy. Bureaucrats and technocrats have every right to suggest the government critical suggestion, disagree. But eventually it is the government of India which takes decision. This is the popular leadership. And sometimes economic decisions are taken contextualizing in social, cultural and popular concept. That's why I call demonetization as economic satyagraha in this country. This country has witnessed many political satyagraha, but for the first time, common people knowing the fact that the black money may be regulated by these people, but they were bearing the pain. Still they were supporting demonetization, still people supporting. I am not going to the technical factors, but I am giving two important things. You know, sometimes we take decisions to give a strong social, contextualizing in social factors. I am giving one example. During the British regime, Gandhi has given the call for the boycott of the British goods, and that time Raghuram Rajan, his predecessor at that time, Western educated economists suggested that this is going to be disastrous for the India, but the people went for the boycott. This time, three factors impacted the demonetization. One, the confidence of the people against the black money. Second, it has a strong message to those who were using black money. Third important thing is that, you know, the Indian banking system was at the verge of collapse. After demonetization, they could get the lease of life. So I think in the...
No. I am going to disagree with you there, sir. I am not going to let you get away with the last point because I think the banking crisis will only deepen. I think banks were distracted from managing their NPS due to demonetization. And to your larger point about crackdown on black money, I don't know if it has really happened. I mean, 99% has made its way back into the system. Yes, the taxman will go after some people and they may also go after honest people like you and me, sir. But I'm going to get in Sanjay Jha to just give a quick retort to this. And Sanjay Jha, I know the Congress party believes that demonetization was a disastrous exercise and that's your political position. So I neither subscribe to this nor do I oppose to this. That's your political position. But the fact that the former RBI governor said that he advised the government against it. Mr. Sinha here says that too bad he advised. The government of the day decided to go ahead. But that is why you have regulators. That is why you have subject matter experts. That is why you have economists as RBI governors. Why ignore that advice? Abolish the RBI, disband it, take all decisions on your own. But let me first get a reaction from you. And I know that's going to be a political reaction, so I'm going to take it with a pinch of salt. Go ahead, Mr. Sanjay Jha.
Yeah, Supriya, let me tell you that isn't it shocking that the government of Mr. Narendra Modi ignored a man who, by the way, was singular, the only extraordinary voice who forecasted the Wall Street bubble collapse in 2007-8, when many people actually sniggered and jeered at him that he was actually trying to downbeat a very bullish enthusiasm, and he forecasted that you're in a bubble that was reflected in the mortgage crisis in the US market. Now, why did Mr. Modi's government ignore him? And that is the fundamental question that we need to ask. It is not political, and I'll tell you why it's not political, because Congress party maintains it, and it's been established now. It cannot be, no matter what rhetoric spin he talks about, economic satyagraha or economic jhoot graha as it's turned out to be. The truth is, this was a political decision. Demonetization was never meant to actually make an economic policy impact. Let me tell you, it was a window dressing. It was an image management exercise for Mr. Modi before the UP elections, because there were a lot of accusations against the government, against him on the Birla Sahara bribery issues, and he wanted to appear like the anti-corruption crusader. Now, the last point, it has been proven that where is the black money is the question we are asking Mr. Modi. The government spent more money printing new money as opposed to the 16,000 crore they got. And the loss in GDP, by the way, the loss in GDP is equivalent to India losing
I don't need
income.
Figures. I have them right here. We are putting it on it now. No, I don't want figures from you. I wanted your reaction. Sanjay Jha, I don't want the figures from you. I have the reactions. And to your larger point, Mr. Sanjay Jha and Mr. Sinha, I will just say, you know, politicians have done what they have to. It's people in India who have to suffer. Our economic growth has taken a hit. No, sir, I disagree with you. I disagree with you, sir, and I'll give you a chance when I'm going to come back to you next.
Has been disaster. It has a support in
there
democracy.
Is a disaster.
No, GDP.
2 percentage point. What are you talking about?
That's Supriya, long-term economic culture of this country that is more important than the short-term impact. You are talking about short-term impact. This is the World Bank. What World Bank says. Raghuram Rajan is a carbon copy of the World Bank economist. I don't question it.
That is rather unfortunate, and I will not take it lying down on my show. No. I will address this whole Desi versus no. Mr. Sinha, this is my show, and please listen to me when I ask you a question. I will come back to you and I will address the Desi versus Videshi economist debate that you want to refer to every time you're answering. I will come back to you, sir, and I respect your point of view on that. But I will take a quick question with Mr. Venkatesh. And you know, Mr. Sinha, the problem with this panel is that we are not a mudslinging channel. We don't shout and yell at the same time. Everybody will get a turn to talk, and trust me on that. You have to have faith in me. But Venkatesh, if I may ask you, he did explicitly tell ET now that the government went ahead despite his advice. Was RBI overruled then?
Now the political call for the demonetization has to be taken by the Prime Minister, on whom we have voted, and we have voted under the Constitution. Now Mr. Raghuram Rajan can have a view on demonetization. There can be billion views on demonetization. But it was the Prime Minister who took a call, and I think it was a political call. And good, bad, ugly, the Prime Minister will either get the necessary votes next time or he will fail next time in the election. Of course, Mr. Raghuram Rajan has a professional duty to have his views, but it cannot be that his views are sacrosanct and it can override the views of the polity of the day.
No, absolutely. Those views should not be sacrosanct, but which is why you have independent regulators, which is why you have subject matter experts. But let's put that debate to rest. Whether he advised, whether he did not advise, did government overrule him, did the government not overrule him? Forget about that. Shamika Ravi, I'm going to ask you the pure economic question. The RBI, and all of us agree, did send a note to the government saying that if you do go ahead with demonetization, this is the kind of preparation required. That is part of a private dialogue. We do not know what it contained, but yes, sources do tell us it contained a whole host of things to prepare. If the government was indeed warned of the disastrous consequences, and if the government did go ahead and demonetize 2 months after he left, did it not figure out what the consequences will be, or was the government just being adventurous? Because look at the level of preparation. There was no transaction currency ready to be replaced. People were queued up. 100 people died during demonetization. Forget about all of that. If I will ask you a direct question, the fact is that ATMs had to be recalibrated. 2,000 rupee note was not according to the size that could be adjusted. I mean, this is not the level of preparation you have when you're demonetizing 86% of your transaction currency.
Correct. Well, was that a statement or a question?
That's a question for you.
I think
it's
on the level of rather unfortunate
if the government
that
knew they were going to do this.
Okay. Well, the point is I'm not privy to that note that RBI basically said to the, sent to the government. So what is the level of preparation? What are the kind of details that were available with the decision makers at the time when this decision was made? We are basically, it's still very much a black hole. But to give credit or attribute costs, it's too early. Though we do, you're right when we discuss the short-term pains because they have been very visible. But you see, the money that is back in the bank, part of that will also be black money. Remember, we have not had a proper audit for which you really need the data scientists sitting with the income tax department, looking at the data to systematically now say that this much of this money which has come back is black and the rest isn't. So just because the cash is back does not mean that there is no black money in the system. That's number one. But the larger point is, the way we do business in this country, that has to change. So whether it is going to be through digitization or just formalizing more and more contracts, bringing it into the, the white economy, I think those are, steps which are being taken, but a lot more needs to be done. So I agree that the disruptions have been there, the political rewards apart, but even the economic disruptions, we really need far more data to be able to tell what the exact impact was. And right now, I haven't read Raghu's book, I have not read the RBI note to assign, so much credit as to say that they had basically, send a note highlighting all the kinds of preparations. I seriously doubt it.
Professor T.T.R. Ram Mohan, I'm going to bring this to you. The government of the day, and Raghuram Rajan did tell me in an interview that the government is in every right to issue a directive to the RBI. There's nothing wrong with it. They are the elected representatives. So, I want to also put this notion to rest that we are rooting for the RBI and not rooting for the government. I think the elected representatives should be taking the final call on everything in this country. I completely agree with my panel here, with Mr. Sinha for sure. But, the question that I'm directing to you is that you take RBI's advice, and RBI's I'm presuming unbiased advice was that do not go in for demonetization, and if you do, this is the level of preparedness that you require. The level of preparedness I have already highlighted was what it was, but there were 19 circulars issued in 22 days. Whose advice was the government and the RBI acting on? I mean, that is really the big question. If a former governor had cautioned you against it, whose advice were you following?
Yes, I mean, the RBI is one of many agencies that provide inputs to the government. It's not as if it's the sole authority on demonetization or any other aspect of the Indian economy. So within the finance ministry itself, there's plenty of advice. We have a chief economic advisor who tenders advice to the government. So you have to be very clear that, the RBI is not the only agency which the government relies on for advice. The second thing, which you correctly pointed out, is that the legal and technical position is that the government is entitled to take a call on demonetization, even if the top brass at RBI is not comfortable with demonetization. So even if the then RBI governor, when the discussions are going on, even if Raghuram Rajan was not comfortable with demonetization and he tendered advice to the effect, the legal position is that the government can overrule his concerns and reservations and go ahead with demonetization. Now, of course, we talk about costs and benefits, and you also several times use the expression disastrous consequences. And I think we need to be very clear that at this point, we don't have a handle either on the costs or on the benefit. We know that there are certain short-term costs, but we have not been able to quantify them properly. And by definition, the long-term benefits can be quantified only over a very long-term period. Now, let me go further and say that suppose we granted to the critics that indeed, the short-term costs exceeded, potential long-term benefits. Suppose that's true. I don't believe that to be the case, but suppose we grant it to the critics.
Right.
But even then, it is for the political authority to take a view on whether the costs are worth the benefits. So they may even feel that there are significant costs which are being imposed in the short run, but whether the costs outweigh the benefit and whether the cost-benefit analysis is acceptable or not is a call that the political authority takes, and it pays the price for it if it takes the wrong call. So you have to understand, that in our scheme of things, these are fundamental decisions of political economy, and whatever the RBI or any other specialized agency may say, it is for the political authority to take the final call.
Okay, political authority can take the final call, and I think what we're doing is we're really judging the electoral victories of the political authority taking that call. I neither support nor oppose demonetization. I have views on this, but those are personal views, not to be aired on Indian television. Mr. M.R. Venkat, I'm going to move to another leg of this entire argument, and that is the RBI dividend. It halved from last year. It came down to 30,000 odd crore rupees from about 60,000 the last fiscal year, and obviously it is because that the government's liabilities increased. Interest had to be paid on deposits that were made, and the RBI had less surplus to give as dividend. Was this a self-goal in some case, in some point of view, as far as the fiscal position of the government is concerned? A self-goal of sorts? Because the government did need that money.
Everybody has to pay a price on demonetization. You paid, I paid, everybody paid. RBI also is paying this part of the price. 30,000 crores or something, I think, if my numbers are correct, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, 30,000 odd crores was the drop in the dividends of RBI. Be that as it may, please understand, what is demonetization all about? It is defattening the economy. And in this defattenization of the economy, where assets, artificial bubbles are being systematically crushed, terror funding is getting crushed, sham companies, shell companies are under attack. You close all these shell companies. You put 5 lakh crores to 7 lakh crores of cash actually deposited into bank under income tax scrutiny. You also do ED, PMLA scrutiny on several of these people who have deposited cash. All this, mind you, is going to cumulatively bring about a contraction in the economy in the short run. You can have buildings all across the place with black money and spurious money. But when you are going to take a war on all this, there is going to be a defattening of the economy that is going to happen. And when this happens, the GDP numbers will never capture this. And GDP numbers will give you a plain vanilla number that the growth dropped from 7.5 to 5.5. It makes titillating headlines for the people who are against demonetization to say, look, we told you so. But the fact of the matter is the quality of growth that was embedded in that 2% between 5.5 and 7.5 was driven by spurious economy, was driven by black economy, was driven by red money, not even black money, red money, which means that this money had to be confiscated, this money had to be probed, this money was funneling terror and other illegal activities. So this process, all of us have to pay a price. RBI has to probably cut down on its dividend. The nation had to cut down on its growth. But I hope if the process is taken to a logical conclusion I do not know whether the bureaucracy has with it to take it to a logical conclusion. The big if is there. But if it is done properly, even today, I see lot of gains rather than pains out of demonetization.
Okay, Maithri, I'm going to quickly ask you a question before I move on to growth, and I think that's the debate we need to have on this show tonight. The RBI dividend debate, you know, I think just shortly after taking over, the DA secretary says we expect a special dividend from the RBI. Raghuram Rajan in his interview to me very assertively said there is no question of a special dividend, there's no provision for one, and also because RBI's liabilities have gone up thanks to all this money that has come back into the system, where is the surplus to give a dividend in any case, a higher dividend? Where does the truth lie, and what do you attribute this uninformed and very loose commentary on dividend to?
Well, yes, that debate was entirely uninformed, because the fact is that the transfer to the government comes from a surplus. That means an excess of income over expenditure, and extinguishing of a liability is not a profit. This is an accounting finesse which perhaps very few people understood, but anybody who is familiar with central bank accounting would have said, and the government perhaps should have clarified right in the beginning itself, that you cannot have a windfall profit from an extinction of a liability. So that itself was always misinformed to start with. Yes, demonetization did have a cost in the sense that RBI had to pay for printing new notes, and there is a cost, as a result of which the RBI's profits to the government, the transfer has more than halved. But this is part of the cost of demonetization which the government will have to bear. It will have to look for alternate sources of revenue. Fortunately, the GST, the initial indications are that GST revenue might come to the rescue of the government, but yes, certainly the RBI's transfer of profits to the government has more than halved. But the windfall profit was never on the table to begin with.
All right, windfall profit was never on the table to begin with, despite the fact that the government did tell the Supreme Court in a sworn affidavit, and the economic survey spoke about that windfall profit. Let's turn focus and talk about growth. And I'm going to take this to Mr. Sinha. And Mr. Sinha, you know, there may be many factors that may have contributed to denting growth in the first quarter. I don't want to get technical here. This is really for my viewers at large. In the first quarter, growth came down to 5.7%, which is about 2 percentage points lower than the previous year at the same quarter. What will you attribute this to? Will you today say that growth was not hit due to demonetization? Because Raghuram Rajan isn't just a former governor, he's also an ace economist, and he believes that demonetization has played a part in hurting India's economic growth. And what is ironical is that we are slowing down when the world around us is picking up.
Empirical facts. Empirical facts are facts. But I have three things to say about the demonetization, and my understanding may be right, may be wrong, maybe partially right, maybe partially wrong.
I want to focus the debate on growth, sir, right now.
Economist. Why should I pretend that I'm an economist? I can give any loose comment. No. Let me give my broad point, and I agree here. There are two people who are experts on economics. Let them speak on that. Three things three impacts I find from demonetization. First, the donation culture of political party has completely, there's a radical change. This donation culture has degenerated the Indian political culture. That's why I think that this demonetization has benefited the country's political culture. Second important thing, you know, there is in share market we have a popular word, sentiment. The same company share today is 500 rupees, tomorrow it becomes 1000 rupees because the sentiment changes. That's why there is also sentiment, people's sentiment. Restoring people's sentiment, there was perception that this country is being led by the black money. Now the empirical fact is that black money is not, there are lesser black money. So sentiment, the government has cared about the sentiment and resurrected the fate of the people in the economic process of the country. Third, give me 30 seconds. Third thing is that, look, in democracy, when decisions are taken, the decisions are taken with the support of the masses. That decision you are calling misadventure, I don't call it adventure, I call it well-considered thought of Narendra Modi, visionary thought, which has changed the dynamics of Indian economy, that would be realized in coming 10 to 15 years.
Okay, I get your Okay, I get your point on demonetization. I don't want to talk about demonetization anymore. The man has said what he has to. We've debated that. Shamika Ravi, I'm going to come to you. Are we going to deny today that demonetization did take a toll on growth? I mean, I know the final numbers may not be out. We may still not know what the final picture looks like in terms of cost and benefits and all of that. But as far as growth is concerned, there is empirical evidence to prove that growth has come down to 5.7%, and there is no reason for us to celebrate that it will go back to 7.5% in the second quarter. Where are the factors? And which is why it is it at least honest for us to admit that growth has taken a beating due to demonetization?
In the short run, yes. But then, it was never meant to be a short run change or a reform to begin with. And which is why I keep going back to, you need, structural reforms going back, which have to back this, sentiments that Rakesh Sinha is talking about, or Professor Rao from Ahmedabad. They're talking about structural reforms in the country, and demonetization was one shock. It has to be backed by several others, and it will be a cumulative impact of all of these. So, to keep going back to the impact it has had on the GDP within the short run, we will not know whether this cost has been worth it until we really begin to see the numbers in due course. So, I really think it's a bit, this debate is really quite, it's quite trivial, frankly, because we keep talking about individuals and personalities and superstars, and we keep talking about short run costs. I think, the caliber of this panel is one that you could actually push them into thinking about what are the next set of structural reforms required to raise growth. Have we done anything to improve ease of doing business? If this government is basically the single largest focus is jobs and ease of doing business, how is reduction of cash or black economy going to improve any of that? What are we doing in terms of the income tax department? Those are exactly the kind of discussions we should be having, and not whether the short run costs, GDP cost has been worth it. I mean, we don't have the numbers.
I get your point, and I appreciate the fact that you're bringing to another, bringing to the table another thread of this discussion. But T.R. Ramohan sir, T.T. Ramohan sir, if I may bring to you, Raghuram Rajan began, and one of his lasting legacies in RBI is targeting inflation, changing the focus of inflation from WPI to CPI. Now, many on the panel may have a view on whether he was right or wrong, but the point that I want to put forward to you is, and a lot of people say that RBI hasn't done enough, either under him or under his successor, to support growth. It hasn't cut rates as much as it should have. My point today is, would it have helped if RBI had cut rates? Were they takers for this sort of credit?
Sorry, can you repeat? I missed your last point. What is your question?
Would it have helped if RBI had lowered rates? Were they takers for credit at all?
Well, whether the RBI has done enough to support growth, or whether it is focused too much on inflation, I think is a legitimate subject for debate. And I think I'm inclined to the view that perhaps it is not done enough in terms of supporting growth, and it has been overly focused on inflation. And certainly, given the low rates of CPI inflation that we've had in recent months, there's a strong case for more aggressive cutting of interest rates and supporting growth. So I think yes, there has been, I would say, an exaggerated focus on containing inflation, and somewhat at the expense of supporting growth.
Okay, I'm going to turn focus and talk to Sanjay Jha at this point in time. The Congress has been quiet, and it's time to get them into this discussion. One of the things that we spoke to Raghuram Rajan about his book and otherwise is NPA. He did wage a war. He wanted to clean up the bank's balance sheets, and that was a very well-intended move. But, Sanjay, while all of that began, and he does say that bankruptcy will help resolve NPAs, the question is, will our legal system support that at all? My question to you really is that, will you at least admit today, will you be candid enough to admit that what his book refers to, or what he is referring to, has genesis in your tenure? The problem began under the UPA. The NPAs all date back to that period.
May I remind you, Supriya, that when the UPA took charge in 2004, the pink papers were talking about the great bank robbery that happened during Vajpayee's time. Listen, there are cumulative NPAs that have happened with certain business houses over a period of several years actually. But there are 2 points that we need to really reconsider. Number one, why is Mr. Modi's government not actually disclosing the names of the biggest corporate defaulters? Why are they not disclosing them? Why are the Supreme Court has, by the way, intervened into the matter? Who is Mr. Modi's government protecting? That's a fundamental question. The second point, I've found a lot of personal pontification on your panel, but unfortunately, facts and figures don't lie. In the long run, we are all dead, said John Maynard Keynes. But in the short term, it is very obvious that if the current government inherited a GDP of 7%, and this is what Raghuram Rajan has said, right, that if a 7% GDP was inherited by Mr. Modi's government in 2014 or May, and you are down to 6.1% in the first quarter and now 5.7%, there's an alarming message to the Indian economy. And by the way, let me tell you, there were 1.5 million jobs lost in December to March. Do you know what that means? This government has not been able to create jobs. And here there are job losses of 1.5 million.
Right.
And now you're going to talk about more farmer suicides.
Right.
Poverty reduction will get even worse. You're having no private investments. Stall projects
Right.
are rising. And by the way, 3.5 years later, this government blames the UPA. What has it done to clear the stressed assets and to improve the balance sheet of the public sector banks? The truth is, or anybody on your panel who tells you there were long-term benefits, let me tell you the truth, that the story on demonetization is over.
No, I am not wasting any more time talking about demonetization. I'm not going to do that.
You did not have to disrupt the entire economy to teach them tax
Sanjay,
compliance.
I am not going to waste time talking about demonetization, trust you me. On that note, I'm going to take a quick breather and I'm going to come back and discuss some more important issues that we flagged off in that interview. So we'll take a quick breather. We'll be back right here on the India Development Debate. Back with you once again on the India Development Debate, and I'm going to turn focus and talk about something that has plagued at least the narrative for a while, and that's the Desi versus the Videshi economists. Of course, Raghuram Rajan was even called a traitor by Subramanian Swamy when he was the RBI governor. But the question really is, and M.R. Venkatesh, I'm going to come to you because I did ask him that question and he said that's a futile debate because how do you question my credentials? Just because people have a foreign degree doesn't mean they aren't Desi enough. But let me ask you, does India have enough talent to ignore whatever little comes our way? I mean, after Rajan, Mr. Panagaria also went away. Is that a sign of how intolerant our system is to well-meaning but external candidates?
I would turn around the question. Is it that the last 70 years our academia has not produced one economist who can be of that nature? If you look at it, you find invariably economist means Harvard, Oxford, etc., etc. You don't say that an economist from, say, Madras University or, say, Calcutta University. Why is it? This question can be turned around. Be that as it may. Let me answer to the point also on which I hold my grudge against Mr. Raghuram Rajan. Let us not forget the fact that Mr. Raghuram Rajan was in the corridors of power between 2009 and 2015. In 2013, late 2013, Mr. Raghuram Rajan begins his war on balance sheets of corporates. He does not realize, and I am sure you will have the number with you, that when we did this whole exercise, we found that between 2009 and 2014, that the non-agricultural credit doubled somewhere between 27 crores to 55 crores. But the corporate lending went from 7 crores to 21 crores, it tripled. When the overall bank lending doubled in non-food credit, bank lending to corporates tripled from 7 to 21 lakh crores. Now my question is, Mr. Raghuram Rajan was advisor to economic advisor to the finance minister. He was there in the corridors of power, North Block, RBI. This bubble was actually built between 2009 and 2013. What was this so-called great economist doing between 2009 and 2013 when the bubble was actually being built brick by brick? And today it is this 21 lakh crores in the corporate debt which is hanging as a millstone around the throats of all our public sector banks.
Okay.
And you know better than me that 12 major corporate borrowers are the chief recurring chief of the bank's balance sheet. And what was done to prevent this? You can always be wise in the hindsight 2020. You can have post an event, but experts are supposed to look into it. And he did not come directly to the RBI governorship in 2013. And when a war against the balance sheet started, if 5 years have taken for the bubble to start and get created, at least in my opinion 3 years has to be given to these corporates to ensure that the balance sheet is in order. You suddenly started recognizing in 2014 that, oh, these balance sheets are all having NPA, they don't have the resources to repay, so we will put them under the NPA bucket. And then we started lampooning every industrialist in this country as if he's a willful defaulter. Did we ever take into consideration the economic crisis in this country between 2010 and 2014 caused largely by the fact of the 2G judgment which created a havoc on our economy? Did we ever realize the impact?
Yes. Mr. Venkatesh, I get your point, but I wasn't talking about NPAs. I'm really putting the focus on this whole Desi versus the Videshi economist debate. We'll get a quick word from Maithili before I move forward to the politicians on the show. And Maithili, I know you have a view on this. There have been columns written by some very senior economists, now part of the government, on the waning away of the Anglo-American influence from Indian economy. But is that a healthy debate at all? I mean, does India have enough talent? Does talent have a citizenship? I mean, that's the big question. How do you start questioning people's Desiness, quote unquote?
No, I agree. You certainly can't do that. But to say, as Raghu has said, that India is not exactly overflowing in talent, there I would disagree, because I think we do have enough talent and more. And merely because somebody has a degree from abroad, particularly from the West, does not necessarily make him more competent to judge on India's policy issues. And frankly, it makes sense if you have somebody who not only is perhaps, we should have our mind open to all kinds of influences, whether from the West or from the East, but these same policy makers, when they come into India, they always would do better if they had a better understanding of the Indian system. So if you compare the economists who came during the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, whether it was a Manmohan Singh or a Monte Ahluwalia or a Shankaracharya, these people came back to India, worked for many years before they rose to positions of eminence. Whereas the economists who have seen more recently, they have come from abroad for a short period, 3 years, 4 years, and then they go back. In that process, they are not able to familiarize themselves with the actual workings of the Indian economy. So in many cases, their knowledge and the kind of decisions they make are more textbookish, more theoretical, and that is where I think we lose out. We certainly must make use of the best use of talent, but I think these people need to work in India, understand how India functions, and then perhaps they will be able to give better advice.
Okay. Mr. Sinha, I will ask you a very direct question. A lot of people who we speak to, who come from overseas, want to give back to the country, are now being faced with these charges that they are fair weather friends, they come on sabbaticals, they will go back to their cushy jobs. Is that a fair argument at all? Because I remember that in the first two answers that you gave, you tried to distinguish the West-trained economists versus the ones in India.
Not a question of foreign degree or foreign scholarship. Maharshi Arvind has foreign scholarship, foreign degree, but you are the great nationalist. It's a question of battle of perspectives. There is a Western model, there is a Eastern model, there is an Indian model. And here I agree with Samika Ravi that structural reform should be in long term, and it should be followed by many reform steps. And if you don't give importance, look here, Samika Ravi is taking certain stand which is matching with the social philosophy of the Indian system. Look, Raghuram Rajan was against giving subsidies to the farmers. Raghuram Rajan was even against not agreeing with the Narega. They thought that this is spoiling the economy. We are not going by the technical part. We are going by what the socio-economic realities of this country. When you are not addressing the socio-economic realities from the welfarist measure, you are just going that making the GDP data. If we have GDP data and thousands and millions of people are dying, you say no, short term they would die, in long term the economy will strengthen. So let me finish. So I think that we have to give importance to people, young talent like Samika Ravi, they are equal. If we won't give importance, there is a psychology that someone is coming with a foreign degree, he must be a talented person, must be leading the Indian economy. That is the wrong perception. And I think the Swadeshi economy means that we must address to our own realities, guided by our own perspective rather than the World Bank, becoming a carbon copy of the World Bank.
Okay, you know what? I'm just going to take a quick word from the two academicians, and then I will throw this to the Congress party, because I just feel this debate is dissing the fact that you can have a foreign degree, but you're not Indian enough to make policies. T.T. Ramon sir, if I may ask you, does somebody from Harvard automatically get disqualified because he hasn't lived in India and so can't be part of policy making? He should leave his job there, he should come live in India for 10 years and then begin giving his views?
No, certainly. I mean, nobody from Harvard or for that matter, Chicago is disqualified from holding a high position in policy making in India. I mean, I wouldn't say that at all. But I think there are two things which are very important. I think sort of Maithili sort of mentioned them. One is that, you should be willing to be here for the long haul. I mean, it's not that, you take a 2-year sabbatical leave or 3-year sabbatical leave and then hop in and out. Because then, in the very nature of things, your effectiveness is bound to be limited. I mean, if you come on a 2-year or 3-year sabbatical, it's going to take you 6 months or a year to get acquainted with the system. And you're spending the last 6 months sort of packing your bags, which in effect means that, you're on the job for 1.5 years, which is really not conducive to your being effective. The second thing is that being effective within a given system is not just a matter of having some knowledge or being acquainted with state-of-the-art research. I mean, you should have the ability to work with the system, by which I mean the ability to work with politicians, ability to work with bureaucrats, the ability to handle the media. So, the making of policy requires, knowledge on many dimensions and not just knowledge of economics. And let me sort of round this off by saying that more than one top policymaker has told me that the economics that you basically need in government or in the finance ministry is economics 101, which is taught at the undergrad level. So it's not that, you need some high-falutin economic ideas in order to be effective. I mean, you need a basic understanding of economics, basic. But combined with the ability to work with the system.
I get that. I get that, Professor Mohan, I get that. I'm running short on time. I have still one topic to cover. Shamika Ravi, does this in some sense mean that, we are essentially looking at economists who can be a part of the system? The guys who say no are not good for India. They should be able to respect the Indian political system, work in the system, be the, I don't know if quote unquote be the yes man, because Raghuram Rajan also told me in this interview that, there is a price for saying no and it can sometimes be a career ending decision.
Well, I disagree with Raghu there. Economic development, Supriya, is also a mission. In fact, if we helicopter in and we believe that we can bring about big, serious changes within a short period of time, that is actually, it would be a bit naive on our behalf to believe that. But let me also put in that I have a foreign degree. I came back to India 12 years back and I've been teaching since and working on all kinds of nuts and bolts and plumbing kinds of issues. But it really is a mission. And learning the system, learning the institutional details, the bureaucracy, it isn't as glamorous when you're working, on the ground, in the field, with the administrators who are really going to make these things, move. But I do think and I do believe there is a shortage. The nature of our training within India is such that we have a lot to achieve. We have to reinvigorate our academia, our research culture, that is correct. So we have to be open to talent from everywhere. We have to also know how to retain talent. But nobody is a superstar, and this is where I think it's a bit naive when the narrative moves towards, oh, so and so said this, and how we make people larger than life, and I think that is where we really move the the discussion away from the real issues towards personalities, and I think that does a lot of damage to the personalities as well as the issues.
I get your point, right? I get your point and I also appreciate this, but I'm going to move to the last leg of my discussion, and I know Raghuram Rajan has been criticized extensively for this. Why did he feel the need to make that intolerant speech? Who was he to make that speech as the RBI governor? Mr. Venkatesh, if I ask you, in his own defense, he told me, and I asked him this, that you were the RBI governor. Why were you going beyond the realm of macroeconomy? And he said, as the RBI governor, I was also a risk manager, and I decided to flag off intolerance as a risk to economic stability. I think do you believe he didn't do anything wrong? Because men in power should flag off concerns, don't they? Mr. Venkatesh.
Perfectly, he must do it, and he has done a professional job of flagging you off. But my answer to that is he did not flag off between 2009 and 2014. Probably when he got the signal that his term was not getting extended, he started flagging off.
So 2009-2014 is a question that Sanjay Jha will have to answer, and I'm going to go to him next. But Maithili, I know you have a very strong view on that. Let me first put that view on the table before I take it forward on the panel.
Well, Supriya, this, on issues like things like intolerance, which are not strictly within the economic domain, central bank governors all over the world typically steer clear. It is, of course, up to the persona of each central bank governor whether he wishes to speak on it or not, but traditionally, neither in India nor abroad, whether you're looking at the US Fed or the Bank of England, these central bank governors normally steer clear. There is a clear demarcation of responsibilities. Just like finance ministers don't normally talk about interest rates, similarly central bank governors don't typically talk about areas outside their economic domain. But of course it is up to each central bank governor, if he feels so strongly, to speak about it. So that, I think, is something that one must leave to the best judgment of the governor. But as I said, central bank governors typically, traditionally, over the years across the world have not stepped out of their domain.
Okay, have not stepped out of the domain. As a risk manager, he decided to flag off the tolerance concern, which was a risk to the macroeconomic stability. People in position of power should flag off their concerns from time to time, is my personal belief. I don't have an opinion on that. But Sanjay Jha, the point that Mr. Venkatesh is making, it's all very good for Dr. Rajan to go out there and talk about tolerance, but why did he not talk about policy paralysis? Why did he not talk about the scams when he was a part of the government here in New Delhi as the chief economic advisor? Why did he not flag off some of those concerns is the question that people will ask today.
Supriya, I'm glad you came back to this point because I was quite restless to respond to it. Terrible distortion of facts there. First and foremost, I think your viewers need to know, and I'm sure the panelists do, that the world went through what was called as the Great Recession, the worst since the 1931 Great Depression. What was India's GDP growth rate, by the way? We were, during the period that the gentleman talked about, India was growing at over 8%. We peaked at 9.6%. That was the period of the highest growth till 2012. How did that happen? That happened because the finance ministers... Can I answer your question? You are interrupting me even before I finish, Supriya. I mean, for God's sake, I've hardly even spoken on your panel today.
I want you to answer my direct question.
I'm answering your question. I'm not answering somebody else's question.
Give me a direct answer. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Can I finish?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, if you let me speak without an interruption, I would have finished by now, Supriya. But now that I'm starting after an explanatory statement, kindly let me finish. The truth, in short, is India was one of the few countries, along with China, that registered the highest growth rates in the world during the period that Mr. Venkatesh was talking about. Point number two, when at that point economic growth was high, it is apparent that many corporates borrowed and they were leveraged. Part of their investments did not take off, primarily in infrastructure, which some of them have thereafter escalated because this government has done nothing into exponential stalled projects, and that has actually hurt the bank's balance sheet. Now, the point that we need to ask is, when we grew, do you realize that India lifted 150 million people out of poverty between 2004 and 12? Can anybody on this panel ignore that reality?
Right.
India, along with China, were the two countries that were quoted all over the world for having reduced poverty alleviation in the country, in the world. I mean, these are facts. I mean, the truth is, yes, there were certain downsides. Inflation was one of them. We paid a price in the 2014 election. But for people to say that Raghuram Rajan was responsible for it, or because he is a foreign educated man, he didn't know, I think is the most absurd charge I've ever heard.
I appreciate your point. You didn't answer my question that why did he not flag off the policy paralysis of the UP or the many scams in your government. But on that note, I think I will have to close this show here. We've completely
Well, that was parliamentary paralysis.
No, sir, I
that was
cannot
a
give anybody
parliamentary
extra time.
gridlock created by the BJP. It was not policy, it was a parliamentary
Sanjay
paralysis.
Sanjay Jha, Mr. Sinha right here, Professor Mohan, Maithili Busturmat, Shamika Ravi and Mr. MMV Venkatesh. Thanks very, very much for being with us on the India Development Debate. The jury is still out there on Raghuram Rajan's tenure, but the man has flagged off the false lines. It's for India to take note and perhaps repair them. We do not go into personality cults. We are not eulogizing or demonizing the man here. But he is one of the most celebrated RBI governors and a son of the soil.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.